The cruise ship slid out of Miami's harbor just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson. Music drifted from the open-air deck, glasses clinked, and laughter carried over the rolling waves. For most of the passengers, this was the start of a vacation, an escape into luxury, cocktails, and promises of new memories. But for Michael Harper, it felt like a chance at redemption. Michael was 44, a man whose life bore the marks of disappointment. He had once been a successful contractor, the kind of man who wore pressed shirts and spoke with confidence. But after a bitter divorce and a business downturn, he carried himself with the heavy gait of someone who had lost more than money. He had lost faith in himself. Friends had urged him to take the cruise, to shake off the dust, and though he wasn't sure what he was searching for, he hoped to find something, anything, that made him feel alive again. He found her by accident. At the ship's polished mahogany bar, under the glow of soft golden light, sat a woman in a black cocktail dress. She had a confidence about her, the kind that didn't need words to announce itself. Her posture was poised, her smile subtle but magnetic. She glanced at Michael once, then again, as though weighing whether he was worth the conversation. Michael, feeling both nervous and oddly compelled, slid into the seat beside her. He lifted his glass, searching for something charming to say. "A cruise is better with someone to talk to, don't you think?" The woman turned to him. Her eyes were sharp but playful, her lips curling into a smile that felt dangerous and inviting all at once. "Depends on who's asking," she replied smoothly. "But tonight, I don't mind." Her name was Alana Brooks. She spoke with a low, velvety tone that drew Michael in closer. They talked about simple things at first, the view, the music, the absurdity of shuffleboard. But underneath, there was a tension neither could deny. Michael felt a spark, a rush he hadn't felt since his 20s. As the ship drifted farther into the dark Atlantic, Michael let himself believe this could be the beginning of something rare. He was unaware, however, that the ocean didn't just hold beauty. It also hid truths that, once uncovered, could drown a man. The following days passed like scenes from a romance Michael thought he'd only see in movies. From the moment he and Alana met at the bar, their paths seemed destined to intertwine. Wherever he went, the upper deck at sunrise, the dining hall at dusk, she was there. Not following him, not chasing him, but moving through the ship's space as though she belonged to every moment of it. On their second evening, Michael invited her to dinner. The dining room buzzed with laughter, waiters in crisp white jackets gliding between tables with silver trays. Alana wore a deep green dress that shimmered under the low lights. Michael couldn't help staring. She laughed when she caught him. "You're supposed to eat, not stare," she teased, her eyes glinting with humor. He grinned back, a little sheepish. "I can't help it. You make it impossible to do anything else." She tilted her head, amused but not dismissive. "Careful with words like that, Michael. Some promises don't age well." They shared wine, stories, and pieces of themselves that usually stayed hidden from strangers. Michael confessed the wounds of his divorce, the bitterness of watching his ex-wife move on so quickly. Alana listened intently, not with pity but with understanding. When it was her turn, she was more guarded, keeping her past vague. "Life teaches you to adapt," she said softly. "You survive by becoming who you were meant to be." Later, they walked the deck together, the ocean breeze lifting Alana's hair, the moonlight carving silver outlines across her face. Michael felt younger, lighter, as though the weight of the past was peeling away. They leaned against the railing, side by side, and for a moment, he forgot the empty house back home, the failures, the loneliness. "It feels like I've known you for years," he admitted, his voice low. "Or maybe," Alana said with a smile that carried both warmth and mystery, "you're finally ready to know someone real." Her words lingered in him long after they returned to their separate cabins. Michael lay awake in his room, listening to the hum of the ship's engines, his chest alive with something he hadn't felt in years, hope. What he didn't know was that hope, so fragile and new, was built on foundations he wasn't prepared to accept. For now, though, under the endless night sky, he believed he had stumbled into something extraordinary. And belief, especially on the open sea, can be dangerous. By the third day at sea, Michael's fascination with Alana had grown into something heavier, an ache that followed him even when she wasn't around. He craved her company, her voice, the ease with which she seemed to read him. But along with desire came questions. There were moments, fleeting but sharp, when Alana pulled away. In the middle of a laugh, she would fall silent if he asked about her childhood. When Michael spoke of family traditions, she would smile wistfully, then change the subject. He noticed the way her eyes darkened, the way her hand trembled slightly when he pressed too far. One afternoon, they lounged on the sun deck. Michael leaned back in his chair, watching Alana trace her fingers along the rim of her glass. "Where'd you grow up?" he asked casually, trying to keep it light. Her smile didn't falter, but her pause lasted just a beat too long. "Here and there," she replied. "Enough places to learn the world isn't always kind." Michael chuckled, though the answer unsettled him. "That's pretty vague." She tilted her sunglasses down, meeting his gaze. "Maybe I like a little mystery." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to stay lost in her charm. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as he walked back to his cabin, he wondered why she guarded herself so tightly. Everyone carried secrets, sure, but Alana's seemed different, like a lock she refused to hand him the key to. Later, in the dim glow of the ship's lounge, Michael saw her again, this time standing alone by the piano. She looked vulnerable, the confidence she wore like armor slipping for just a moment. He approached slowly, sensing something fragile beneath her polished exterior. "Talk to me," he whispered, touching her arm gently. "I feel like there's a whole part of you I don't know." Alana's eyes glistened as she searched his face. For a second, it looked as if she might open up, as if the walls might finally crack. But instead she drew in a sharp breath and shook her head. "Some truths," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the music, "aren't meant to be shared so easily." Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine. He wanted to push, but he also feared the answer. As he walked back into the night air, the ship slicing through black waters, his mind spun with possibilities. Desire battled with suspicion. Hope tangled with unease. He didn't know it yet, but the truth he longed for would not only shatter the illusion, it would ignite a storm that could never be contained. The storm inside Michael finally broke on the fourth night. The ship glided through calm waters, but his thoughts were anything but steady. The unanswered questions, the evasive glances, the half-truths, everything about Alana had begun to gnaw at him. They had shared another dinner, and for a while it felt like things were back to the way they were. She was radiant, her laughter rolling across the table like music. But when they returned to her cabin and the intimacy deepened, Michael's world shifted in an instant. In that dim cabin light, his hands stumbled across something that didn't fit his expectations, something that told a story Alana hadn't voiced. His breath caught, his heart pounded. Confusion crashed into rage, and he pulled back as though burned. "What the hell is this?" His voice was hoarse, trembling with disbelief. Alana froze. Her eyes, usually so sure, were wide with fear. She reached for him, her hands shaking. "Michael, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" His tone sharpened, his face contorting with fury. "That everything you told me was a lie? That you made me a fool in front of everyone?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant to deceive you. I am who I am. I thought you could see me, not just the past I left behind." But Michael wasn't listening. His pride felt wounded, his trust shattered. And when she whispered the truth, when she admitted she was transgender, when she spoke of the battle she had fought to become the woman he had fallen for, Michael's chest tightened, his anger twisting into something darker. "You tricked me," he hissed. "You let me believe you were someone else. All this time." Alana stepped forward, desperation pouring from her voice. "No, Michael. I never tricked you. I gave you my heart, my truth. You just don't want to accept it." The words struck like lightning. He saw not only the truth of her identity, but also the truth of his own prejudice, festering in the corners of his mind. The color of her skin, her history, her courage, it all became fuel for the fire already raging inside him. Michael stormed out onto the deck, his hands gripping the railing as the waves below churned. His thoughts spiraled, betrayal, shame, humiliation. To him, it wasn't love anymore. It was exposure. It was weakness. And in his world, weakness had always demanded retribution. In that moment, the ocean was silent witness to the birth of something lethal. The man who had once sought healing was now drowning in rage, and the storm that followed would consume them both. The ship rocked gently under the moonlit sky, but for Michael Harper, the world had already tipped off its axis. He stalked through the narrow corridor back to his cabin, his mind a storm of humiliation and rage. Every step echoed with one thought. She lied. She made me believe. Inside his cabin, he yanked open the drawer where he'd stashed his handgun. He had brought it aboard out of habit, a relic of his life back home, where he claimed a man should always protect himself. Now, his trembling hands wrapped around the cold steel as if it were the only thing anchoring him. Meanwhile, Alana sat alone in her room, her body still shaking from the confrontation. She had wanted to tell him, had nearly done so a dozen times, but fear had always pulled her back. She whispered to the empty walls, her voice cracking. Why can't love ever just be enough? When Michael returned, the gun was hidden in the waistband of his jeans. He slammed the door shut, startling her. Michael, please, she began, rising to her feet, tears streaking down her cheeks. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to see me, all of me. See you? His laugh was harsh, almost manic. I see you now, Alana, and all I feel is disgust. You turned me into a damn fool. Her voice quivered but held steady. No, I turned myself into the woman I was meant to be. The only fool here is the man who can't accept love when it's standing right in front of him. Those words, filled with defiance and truth, cut deeper than any blade. Michael's face twisted, veins rising in his neck. He pulled the gun free, his hand shaking violently. Don't, Alana cried out, stumbling back against the wall. This isn't who you are. Please, Michael, you don't have to do this. For a brief heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes, hesitation, maybe even regret. But pride drowned it. With a roar torn from somewhere primal, he pulled the trigger. The sound ripped through the cabin, louder than the ocean itself. Alana's body jerked, her hand clutching at the wound. She gasped, eyes wide in shock, then staggered toward him as if still reaching for mercy. Michael fired again, and again. By the time the final shot echoed, she collapsed to the floor, her blood staining the cabin carpet. Her last look wasn't one of fear, it was sorrow. A silent question, why wasn't love enough? Outside, passengers screamed as the gunshots shattered the night. The music stopped, panic spreading like fire. The ship that had promised joy now carried the weight of tragedy, and there was no turning back. The gunshots echoed through the steel hallways of the cruise ship, ricocheting like thunder across the decks. Within seconds, screams erupted. Passengers rushed from their cabins, some clutching children, others fumbling for their phones, desperate to understand what horror had just split the night in two. Inside Alana's cabin, silence pressed down after the final shot. Her body lay crumpled on the carpet, the life that had burned so brightly extinguished in an instant. Michael stood over her, his chest heaving, the pistol trembling in his hand. Sweat poured down his face as the reality of what he'd done settled over him like a suffocating shroud. Footsteps pounded in the corridor. Crew members burst in, their eyes widening at the bloody scene. One young steward gasped, his face pale as paper. Oh my God, what did you do? Michael's voice cracked, his tone somewhere between rage and desperation. She lied to me. Don't you get it? She lied, but no one was listening. The steward shouted for help, and within moments, 2 ship security officers charged in, weapons drawn. Drop the gun, one barked. Michael's grip tightened. For a moment, it looked as if he might raise the weapon again. But then, shaking violently, he let it clatter to the floor. The metallic sound rang like a final verdict. Passengers crowded the hallway, peering in with horrified faces. Some wept openly, others whispered in disbelief. Phones recorded everything. The blood, the lifeless body, the man being shoved to his knees. Hands behind your head, a guard shouted, forcing Michael down. He didn't resist, only muttered over and over. She tricked me, she tricked me. The captain, a stoic man in his 60s, soon arrived, his expression carved from stone. He ordered the area sealed off and the passengers ushered away. The cabin became a crime scene, the cruise ship a floating prison until authorities could intervene. Hours later, under the blanket of night, the Coast Guard cutter pulled alongside the vessel. Armed officers stormed aboard, taking custody of Michael Harper. Shackled and silent, he was marched past the passengers who had once toasted champagne under the same stars. Now, they stared at him with disgust, their luxury getaway transformed into a nightmare they would never forget. As the Coast Guard boat carried him toward the mainland, Michael sat hunched, staring at his blood-stained hands. He had wanted control, he had wanted revenge, but all he had left was emptiness. Behind him, the cruise ship drifted forward, its passengers haunted, its decks forever scarred by the violence he had unleashed. By the time the Coast Guard delivered Michael Harper to the authorities in Florida, the story had already begun its relentless march across the country. What had started as whispers among terrified passengers became headlines within hours. Murder on the high seas. Cruise ship turns into crime scene. And soon, the truth behind the violence emerged. Michael had killed Alana Brooks after discovering she was transgender and black. The media devoured every detail. Cable news anchors spoke with somber faces, their voices laced with outrage. Talk shows replayed shaky cell phone footage taken by passengers. The screams, the blood, the moment Michael was dragged away in handcuffs. Reporters camped outside the port, microphones thrust forward as survivors disembarked, their voices trembling with shock. She was beautiful, kind. One woman sobbed into a camera. She didn't deserve this. No one does. Almost immediately, the story ignited a national firestorm. Advocates for the LGBTQ+ community and civil rights leaders condemned the killing as a brutal hate crime. Candlelight vigils sprang up in Miami, New York, Los Angeles. Protesters held signs that read, "Justice for Alana," and "Love shouldn't cost a life." Alana's family spoke publicly just days later, standing before cameras with tears streaking their faces. Her younger sister, voice trembling but strong, declared, "Alana lived her truth every single day. She was brave enough to love, brave enough to be herself. And for that, she was taken from us. My sister's blood cries out for justice." Meanwhile, Michael's name became synonymous with hatred. Editorials painted him as the embodiment of toxic pride and prejudice. On social media, debates raged. Some tried to justify his actions, but their voices were drowned beneath a tidal wave of condemnation. For many, the tragedy wasn't just about one man and one woman. It became a mirror reflecting the nation's darkest fault lines. Conversations about identity, race, and acceptance dominated airwaves. Alana's face, radiant, smiling, appeared on magazine covers and news profiles, no longer just a woman on a cruise ship, but a symbol of courage stolen by ignorance. Back in his holding cell, Michael watched snippets of the coverage on a small television. His face flashed across the screen, grainy mugshots and words like hate, bigotry, and murder. Each headline tightened the noose of his own making. He muttered to himself, the same refrain. She lied. She tricked me. But outside those walls, no one was listening. The world had already chosen its truth. And that truth demanded justice. The courthouse in Miami was packed to the rafters on the morning of Michael Harper's trial. Reporters jostled for position on the steps, cameras flashing as protesters shouted from behind barricades. Inside, the air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves understood that history was about to be written. Michael entered in shackles, dressed in a plain gray suit that did little to hide the weight he'd lost behind bars. His eyes darted nervously around the room, avoiding the front row where Alana's family sat, their faces etched with grief and fury. Every step he took was met with the low rumble of whispers, the air vibrating with judgment. The prosecution wasted no time. Standing tall before the jury, the district attorney's voice carried the weight of outrage. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not complicated. Michael Harper shot and killed Alana Brooks, not in self-defense, not in the heat of combat, but out of prejudice and pride. He discovered her truth and chose violence instead of humanity." Michael shifted uneasily in his chair as the words echoed. His defense attorney, a weary man with thinning hair, tried to push back. He argued that Michael had suffered emotional shock, that he had acted out of panic, not hatred. But the jury's faces were stony, their eyes cold. They had seen the videos. They had heard the screams. Witnesses took the stand. Passengers described the horror on that cruise ship, their voices breaking as they recalled the gunshots, the chaos, the sight of Alana collapsing. One man's testimony silenced the room. She begged him. She begged for her life. And he still pulled the trigger. Alana's sister testified too, clutching a tissue in her trembling hands. Her voice cracked, but her words were sharp as steel. "He didn't just kill my sister. He killed a piece of hope for everyone who loved her, for everyone who believed love could overcome hate. Michael finally spoke, his voice raw with desperation. She deceived me. I didn't know who she really was. I snapped. Any man would have snapped. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of disgust. The judge banged the gavel. Order. But the damage was done. His words revealed not remorse, but the same poisoned pride that had fueled the bullets. The prosecution pounced, pointing at him as though pinning him to the wall. There is your truth, the attorney thundered. Not remorse. Not confusion. Hatred. The jury sat frozen, their expressions grim. And as the trial stretched on, it became clear Michael Harper was not a man on the edge. He was a man who had stepped willingly into darkness. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in. Hours had passed since they left to deliberate, but to the families seated inside, it felt like days. Every shuffle of feet, every cough echoed like thunder. Michael Harper sat stiffly at the defense table, his jaw clenched, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights in a holding cell. His hands trembled, though he tried to hide it by folding them tightly in his lap. All rise. The jury foreman stood, a sheet of paper in his hands. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but solemn. In the case of the state of Florida versus Michael Harper, we find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. Gasps rippled through the room. Alana's family clutched one another, tears streaming down their faces as they finally heard the word they had prayed for, guilty. The prosecutor nodded once, her lips tightening in grim satisfaction. Michael closed his eyes, his head dropping forward. For a brief moment, he looked less like a man and more like a broken shadow, crushed by the weight of a future he could no longer control. But then he lifted his head, and the bitterness returned. He muttered under his breath, "She deceived me, she deceived me." The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, delivered the final blow. "Mr. Harper, your crime was not committed in ignorance. It was committed in malice, born of prejudice, and carried out with cold resolve. You extinguished a life not because you were in danger, but because you refused to accept the truth of another human being. For that, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel came down with a crack that reverberated like a gunshot. Alana's mother sobbed openly, her grief raw but tinged with relief. Her sister whispered through tears, "She finally has justice." In the gallery, strangers wept too. People who had never met Alana but who now carried her story in their hearts. Michael was led away in handcuffs. As he passed the row where Alana's family sat, he glanced at them with hollow eyes. There was no apology, no plea for forgiveness. Only emptiness. The kind of emptiness that swallows a man whole when the last illusion of control has been stripped from him. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the echoes of that verdict lingered. Justice had been spoken, but the wound left behind would not heal easily. For Alana's family, the sentence was closure, but it was not enough to fill the silence she had left behind. The ocean was calm the day they laid Alana Brooks to rest. Her family chose the shore, just a short drive from Miami, where the waves lapped gently against the sand as if offering comfort. A crowd gathered. Family, friends, activists, strangers who had only learned her name through headlines but felt compelled to stand witness. Candles flickered in the breeze, and photographs of Alana, smiling wide and radiant, were placed along the edge of the water. Her mother, dressed in black with trembling hands, held a single white rose. "She was my daughter," she said, her voice breaking. And she was proud of who she was. That pride cost her life, but it will not be in vain. One by one, people stepped forward to share stories. Friends remembered her laughter, her fierce compassion, her stubborn refusal to live as anything other than herself. An old neighbor described how she had once stood up to bullies on the block, protecting kids who couldn't defend themselves. A colleague spoke of her dreams to open a nonprofit for LGBTQ youth. Every word painted Alana not as a victim, but as a fighter, someone who had spent her life demanding a place in a world determined to push her aside. As the sun dipped lower, the mourners carried flowers into the surf, releasing them into the waves. White, red, and yellow blossoms drifted out to sea, forming a bright trail that stretched toward the horizon. Her sister whispered through tears, "Now the ocean carries her, free at last." Far away, Michael Harper sat in a prison cell no larger than the cabin where he had ended her life. The silence was unrelenting, broken only by the distant clang of steel doors. He replayed the trial in his head, the look in Alana's eyes before the final shot. Yet remorse never fully came. What filled him instead was emptiness, a hollow that even hatred could no longer satisfy. But outside those prison walls, Alana's story lived on. Vigils spread beyond Florida, reaching Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles. Hashtags bearing her name trended worldwide. Laws were debated, classrooms discussed her case, and her face became a symbol for the voices still silenced by prejudice. The waves carried the flowers farther out, their colors fading into the endless blue. The mourners stood quietly, some holding hands, others bowing their heads. A breeze swept across the shore, gentle but steady, as if carrying her spirit forward. And in that moment, Alana Brooks was more than just a woman lost to violence. She was a reminder, seared into the conscience of a nation, that love and truth should never cost a life, and yet too often, they still do.